but you can see here now that it'll probably give you a good idea of exactly what they're going to be using.
Yeah, it definitely looks like it's going to be a zoo coming out from Duncan, and it looks like it's going to be the odd, or potentially the odd rogue coming out from HelloLeeroy. I don't know why you'd run Captain Greenskin if it wasn't the odd. So yeah, it looks like it's going to be that, and we'll have to have a look how this pans out. It does look like this is slightly favored for the odd rogue. So the odd rogue at 54% on the replay stats. So you would imagine just off the offset here, maybe HelloLeeroy has the slight advantage. And
as you can see, they kept his Thug. Obviously, you don't know any rogue who actually wouldn't keep it in that kind of respect. And as you saw there, that Duncan did get rid of his Soulfire. Not sure if that will cause an issue as of yet, but at least he's got that Tar Creeper on board to keep him going.
Yeah, you were looking specifically, I think, when you're playing this Warlock, you're looking to use that for burn at some point, or you're either looking for an emergency piece of clearance, but you wouldn't want to open up with it. You wouldn't want to keep it in your hand. You just want to make sure you get minion pressure down versus this odd rogue. The one thing that the odd rogue will eventually struggle with is if you go wide enough. It doesn't really have the board clears to cope with that. It's not like it's got massive AoE board clears to deal with the spam that you can get from something like this Zoo Warlock. So HelloLeeroy is more concerned here. He'll try and clean up what he can with his daggers. He'll take a bit of face damage for that, but he wants to try and keep things on board as long as possible. As the longer that he can keep board control, the better it is for him.
That's right, and of course Duncan will try and get out of that pickle in terms of weight, but like I mentioned before, and like you said as well, of course, with that Soulfire, that's completely understandable. You don't want it straight away in that first mulligan. But, of course, they will assume you have that in hand. But how we'll deal with it will be another story.
So he's got options here. He could coin out a Tar Creeper, which does prevent face damage. I think it's probably the best play that he could have made there. Playing a Light Warden and a Voodoo Doctor, although you would have got a slightly more powerful Light Warden on the board, both of them could have been easily cleaned up by just the daggers and the Firefly. So this is probably the best play that Duncan could have made. His other option was tapping as well. So he had few options open to him at that point, but this was probably the best way to just try and slow down the pressure, because there's nothing like Vile Spine available. The coin is not there for HelloLeeroy. Obviously, he needs to be turn 4 to use that as well. And this makes this turn a little bit more awkward for Leeroy, but he's just happy to pump up that Hench Clan Thug with that hit, knowing that next turn he has the option to just re-dagger, hit again, and start generating pressure.
And as you can see, with that KLSF, not too bad to have the draw, but I'd be interested to see when he'll use Light Warden. Of course, those Life Drinkers will be a big help, but it depends when he'll actually play them. I assume he may wait until turn 5, but of course, yeah, he has got other options.
So he's got two options here. He could play Light Warden, or he could just Voodoo Doctor his Tar Creeper, which means that HelloLeeroy would actually have to waste a dagger hit well, he wouldn't have to, but it makes it more difficult for HelloLeeroy to consider his options when dealing with this. The best option for him probably would have been daggering and hitting in and having the Hench Clan Thug at 5 so he could hit him in the face. This time, now he's going to probably have to think about either trading the Hench Clan Thug in with the Firefly, losing a lot of HP on his Hench Clan and losing the Firefly, then using his daggers to trade into the 2-2, which means Duncan then can clear up the following turn. So it just made it a little bit more awkward for Leeroy to have to deal with this board by healing up that Tar Creeper, because otherwise Leeroy would have punched in with his face and used the Firefly to get the remaining damage down, and then would have used a 5-5 Hench Clan and slammed that right to the noggin. So it was just a little play there that's now made Leeroy's board a little bit more difficult, and this turn a bit harder for him to try and think around, at least from what Duncan can see on the board.
So many options.
You can tell from his reaction now, he is trying to figure out exactly what his next option will be. Of course, he does have that Fungal Mancer to play on the turn 5. Oh, yeah. Yes. Oh, yes. So at least turn 5, he's got a decision. He can either play that Light Warden and then use Life Drinker afterwards. At least that way, it's got a little bit more damage on the board for when he gets his minions up. And of course, he has got Fungal Mancer to play straight afterwards.
Sure. I like this from Leeroy. I really do, because okay, it looks like he's trading in negatively in terms of losing a lot of minion space on the board. But the healthier that you can keep your Hench Clan Thug, the better it is for you. And this now makes it difficult for Duncan, because Duncan doesn't really have much direct damage apart from that Soulfire. He has got a really good top deck there, but Leeroy now knows that just based on Duncan's deck, it'll be hard for him to deal that 1 extra damage because he plays Keleseth, so he's not going to have things like Defile or anything like that, or he'll be. And you usually don't run Hellfire in this kind of deck because you don't want to clear up your own board states, which you want to be building up by turn 4.
Yeah, not really the best thing you want to do, does it?
No, no. So he's just trying to make it as awkward as possible. There was the option to slam him in the head, but obviously Leroy probably realizes that Duncan runs things like Life Drinker, and maybe just trying to gain control of the board for as long as possible is the best option.
Yeah, that's perfectly understandable in my opinion. Of course, with that chain gun, he will delay things enough to decide what to do afterwards. We'll take at least both of them out.
Yeah, this is not bad actually from Leroy, because again, he's now going to force an awkward trade from Duncan. He doesn't really have too many ways of dealing a single damage to the board apart from trading a minion in here. So a good pick up there for Leroy to use that green skin, but again, Duncan can just spam the board a bit more, and it looks like he's going to make this play of the Life Drinker and the Light Warden, which is going to buff that Life Drinker up a little bit. And actually, there's a lot of face damage going into Leroy right now, and I don't think Duncan's too bothered about the board that's trying to build up too much. He's already dealt 17 damage. Leroy's using his face to trade over and over again, and he's staring down 10 damage on board, and a Life Drinker then afterwards would just kill him off.
And Leroy now has actually got Fungal Mance of his own, so I'll be interested to see when he'll actually play that. Leroy, kind of a dead card until the next few turns, since, well, considering Duncan's still on 30 HP, but now it's quite a hard decision for him to make. Now, curious to see if he actually wants to trade or he actually wants to go straight into this afterwards, but I think he'll probably wait patiently until he sees exactly what Leroy's get straight afterwards, but at least manage to take out.
I think this is the best decision here because he wants to save Fungal Mancer until it's really, really impactful. And actually what Leroy's doing right now well is he's controlling the board against an archetype that likes to flood the board. And so Duncan's now struggling, I think, a little bit just to keep up with how Leroy's getting this board going very wide. And Leroy now has the follow-up of Fungal Mancer to help him trade off a bit more effectively in the future too. And Duncan's now looking at his options. Doesn't really have a way to play the Happy Ghoul easily apart from using the Life Drink, because that's what he's going to do. And now he gets another 3-3 and a 4-4 on board. With 7 HP for Leroy, he has to be so careful now.
I'd assume Leroy now will just keep trading to at least to a certain point. Of course, 7 HP, he hasn't got any Life Drinkers left, so he's going to have to try and find another way. And there's always that possibility that he'll assume Duncan will have that Mancer again. So, and that's the only other option. And it's funny, you were talking about Hellfire before when you were saying, obviously, it takes out their own minions. It's a shame, really, because you probably wouldn't mind it too much now, but of course, it will still have 1 minion on the board, even if he did. But, you know, Leroy does have some answers there. He still should be okay considering the circumstances, because now Duncan's going to struggle to get any minions on the board to actually have that lethal.
So I think now Leroy's options are pretty clear. I think this looks like a Fungal Mancer, trade the 5-1 into the 4-4, trade your 1-3, into the 3-3, then dagger up and start hitting in the face, because you've got to start churning face damage at some point here, because at this point, you're on a timer. At this point, you're on an absolute timer. Like, you know that Soulfires are running the deck, and you won't be able to trade forever. You've got to start getting that face damage down, and you've got the Leroy in hand too. So if you have a look at the damage that he's got on board, 3-3, 2-2, let me just count this in my head, 11 plus the 30. I mean, he's almost looking at lethal with Leroy as well, so...
Done.
And this could be a last-ditch effort here. You were mentioning saying that he was going to use his face to take out the other minion, but decides to use his Diamond anyway. I think he just wants to play it as safe as possible. He doesn't want to take any risks in case that 7 HP does drop eventually, but I'm glad that he does play. So I probably would play it safe personally myself in this kind of scenario, because you're not too sure. Yeah, sure, fair enough. We know what kind of deck he has.
You have to play it safe. Yeah. I mean, he will be very reluctant to go below 4 HP at this point in time. So he'll be thinking in his head, the best trade I think he makes with his face is into the Fungal Mancer itself. Going below 4 HP or 4 or below means that a single top deck of a Soulfire is going to ruin his day. Yeah, you took the word right in my mouth. I was literally going to say, if it does get either those 2 Soulfires, we'll be pretty done for. But, you know, I think he's playing this well so far. He has to trade. And this is what feels really bad for Leroy. In fact, he's actually going to preserve his life total even more, and he's just going to start hitting in the face. But he's had to trade so many of his powerful minions there just because of the sort of the threat that Duncan put up with the Keleseth. But Duncan's going to start tapping now, and that will help Leroy, but also will help Duncan as well, because he'll be accessing more resources. But the more that Duncan taps now, the better it is for Leroy in terms of getting down to that Leroy range. I mean, that sounds really bad because he's called Leroy, but getting down to that Leroy range is really important.
No pun intended, of course, but, you know, it's quite hard because at the moment...
1, 2, 3, 4, wait a second. Leroy plus Cold Blood is 10.
10
That's
11,
exactly...
I think that is exactly...
No, I think he might be... He's one off. He's one off lethal because it's 16.
No, he has got lethal, I think.
Oh,
that's exactly 17.
Oh, sorry, I can't count. Yeah, no, it's right. It is 17. It's exactly lethal. I thought it was 16.
I can teach you some math if you like.
Thank you. I'd actually really appreciate that. For some reason, I counted on board as 4 instead of 5, so I counted the 3 plus 2 there on 5.
Yeah.
But there you go. That's exactly what he needed. 2 incredible top decks for Leeroy. Keep him in this game, and it was a slightly favoured odd rogue matchup. He was controlling the board really well. Duncan never really managed to get to the win condition of Zoo, which is just flood the board with minions that buffed up by Keleseth. He even picked up Keleseth fairly early on in the game there. But Leeroy was just constantly able to deal with that and dealt with it really nicely. Just the best thing you can do against a Zoo Warlock is control the board.
That's the problem what Leeroy had as well, is with any of those kind of road decks, it gets to the point where, you know, yes, you're fair enough for the first half of the game, but the second half you lose steam, lose tempo, there's nothing much more you can do. But that Cold Blood, I think, kind of saved the day for him. But even then, he's still got a bit of ball control, so he could have taken over after a couple more turns. Yeah,
absolutely. I think one thing that Leeroy was very conscious about in that game is that his life total had been used as a resource quite consistently. And when you're playing up against the Zoo Warlock, which runs those Soulfires, you have to be very careful. You saw he was so reluctant to even use his face to trade into the Fungalmancer because he was so scared of either putting himself in something like a Leeroy range, which you don't know whether the Duncan was running that in his list. I don't know if he did, but we couldn't tell because I think it's moderately unlikely. But even then, just having the potential for a Soulfire and then next turn into another Soulfire, he had to be so careful. So 7 HP was keeping it really, really cool, trying to maintain the board as much as possible, and did well.
Yeah, it's like I said before, it depends on what kind of road decks they normally play. Leeroy is in most of them, or maybe not all of them, if I remember rightly. Could be wrong, but I think in that kind of respect, you are right. When it gets to a point where, in those kind of matchups, when he life taps so much, is that you're only going to survive for a couple more turns. Even if you get the minions on the board, if he's got enough to at least trade off, that should be fine. But with that Leeroy and Cold Blood at the end, that kind of just said things and done.
Yeah, absolutely, and there we go. So we are heading into our next matchup here, and it looks like it is going to be that even Shaman coming out from Duncan, as far as it looks, and Leeroy running what's going to be Control Warlock, you think, with the Giants, and it could very well be Cube Warlock as well, but we just can't tell quite yet.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of Cube Locks in the meta so far. I'm glad Duncan did keep that Hex, because most of the Warlock players do keep the Mountain Giant, of course, but it depends on the situation now. As you can see, with even Shaman, it gets played quite a lot, not just in tournament play, but also on ladder, but it's going to be a tough one. But I'm glad that Duncan at least got that Hex to take out that Mountain Giant to begin with.
So Mountain Giant is obviously a great card to have in hand. Also does have Prince Taladram, so we can guess that it is likely going to be a Cube Warlock here. That's really the only reason that you would run that in the deck, to just copy up a Cube. And Duncan, being an even Shaman, is thinking about either just toteming, obviously, on turn 1, or saving his coin for something a bit more effective, which is going to be the case. I think he was thinking about a Primal Fim totem there, just to start pumping out pressure.
I think the reason why we wanted to keep his coin, because he knew that, of course, when that Mountain Giant comes out, or if any other kind of shenanigans does happen, he wants to keep it there more as a safety net, just to see what he can do. I think he's just waiting for the options Leeroy actually takes to see what he does afterwards.
So Primal Fin's going to come out now. Nothing really to use your Merc Spark on at this point in time. So just happy to start generating pressure. Although this is I mean, look, it's not really a board that you want to defile, but it does walk right into a defile board if you absolutely want that. It is on the cards, although it doesn't feel like a super effective defile here for Leeroy. So he'll say, well, that's going to be the case for the next few turns anyway. I don't need to defile a 1 power. I'll always have the option to defile in the future. And so as long as I keep it as it is, that's fine.
Yeah, that's understandable. He wants to make that defile as cost-effective as possible, which is pretty understandable. And at least that way, Duncan can keep that for a little bit longer until he does make that decision. Of course, that defile, not really too much use now.
Well, it's
but it could take a little bit in terms of that, though, anyway.
Defile into Doomsayer, with this fact that this Primal Fim totem is going to be a nuisance now, is absolutely fine. And now Duncan either has to hex it to preserve what is a 2/2 Primal Fim totem, or has to just try to just pass turn. So that's kind of the decision I think Duncan's got at this point in time. It looks like it's going to be, looks like it might just be a pass turn. I mean, it's a big resource to invest. You would much rather spend that on a cube, basically. You don't want to waste it on a Doomsayer. You're happy to let tempo go back over to Leeroy. And Leeroy now has the option to just slam that Mountain Giant down.
did you feel like maybe he should have put his Doomsayer down just that little bit earlier to maybe save his Defile? Because with Defile, that can be so cost effective, especially in the late game as well, depending on the scenario of the actual board, depending on how many minions Duncan would have. This is quite a hard one.
It's a really difficult choice because that Primal Fin was so beefy with the might that it would just continue to pump out 1-1s. Leeroy does have to be a little bit conscious about his health total. And actually, you can see here, Duncan straight in, just going straight for that life total.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be mucking about too much at the moment. And of course, Duncan does still have that Hex, and I think he's trying to make it so that Leeroy may assume that he doesn't have one.
Let's have a look what Leeroy chooses to do here. He's going to use Prince Taladram just to clean this up, and that's actually a really nice play from Leeroy. Heads up, keeps the board in a good state. Wondering what Duncan's idea was behind the coin charge, because I'm thinking that maybe he was wanting to follow up with a Fire Elemental, then Merc Spark to the face, maybe just looking to get him low enough that he would maybe some point have that ability to use face damage, but he did have the option to just straight up Hex. Straight up Hex the Mountain Giant there.
Yeah,
maybe wanting to put pressure on the life total?
Possibly, yeah, it was quite a strange one. I was assuming he might just Hex the Giant and then maybe get another totem on the board, or maybe get the Berserk on the board, but it seems like he wanted to change things up. I even thought that he might actually charge into the Mountain Giant and then charge again afterwards, but of course, Leeroy's got plenty of cards actually stop that from happening anyway.
There we go. It is going to be traditional Q block. He didn't pull a Void Lord, had one of those in hand already, so he's now got the Doom Guard on board, which, you know, there is the option to just completely clean up, but I think you're kind of feeling like you want to jam 8 damage to face, although Leeroy with the 17 life total wants to be as comfortable as possible, and so he's happy to just go for complete board control at this point.
And as you can see now, he probably will use the Fire Elemental to maybe take out the Giant, but of course, he has got Hagger for there, so he can probably play that turn 8 straight afterwards. I'm not too sure if he will play the Fire Elemental, but I would be quite surprised if he doesn't.
Fire Elemental does clean up a 8-1 nicely, so I think it is a pretty solid turn for Duncan. He is thinking through his options here. The Hex is on the board. He maybe doesn't want to get cubed, which is obviously something that he does have to have in the back of his mind. Really, I don't think there are many options other than the Hex or the Fire Elemental, and I think he's so conscious about the cube going onto the Doom Guard that he is going to straight up Hex it here.
I think he wanted to save that Hex for maybe a Void Walk or something like that, just to at least keep him back and keep him Metacomb, because that's the problem. When you've got one of those on the board, it's so difficult to take out, and there could be a potential chance now to have it on board after he's just used that Hex, and he gets one after all that.
Also, by hexing the Doom Guard, you remove it from the Blood Reaver Gul'dan pool as well, so it's really important that that now doesn't become something that it can A, get cubed, and B, it no longer gets brought back with the Blood Reaver Gul'dan. It looks like Duncan was very happy to let the Mountain Giant survive for the simple reason that he was going to Haggard the next turn anyway. So he's Haggard, he's got lots of minions in hand, and now actually he's going to start generating lots of value.
Darkness rises.
And with those 2 Void Lords at the moment, it's going to be quite a tough one. Managed to get a Sea Giant after a little bit of time, but we'll be playing the Lich King anyway, just to see exactly what he can get and if there's any way to take out these 2 Void Walkers, because he hasn't got too many options right now, apart from Earthshock, which is not too bad.
That's a pretty solid pickup, if I'm completely honest. It's about whether you think it's useful right now, though. I mean, I think you save that for a cube, and it looks like with both Dark Pacts gone, it's a really solid keep for a cube. Although it looks like Leeroy is very happy to just say, I'm going to take your Lich King, I'm going to trade in and keep my Void Lords alive, or at least, actually, I'm going to kill one of them off for the Blood Reaver Gul'dan, because he does need to get some demons dead. But yeah, I think you keep the Earthshock for the cube, absolutely. Because he's ran out of ways to kill his cube now. He's used 2 Dark Pacts, at least for the most part. Oh, okay.
And of course, he's going to silence that straight away. Don't blame him at all. But again, like you said before, what a card to have, and he'll use Doom Pact straight afterwards, so that it won't show another 3 Void Walkers.
Oh, Doom Pact takes out a couple of key cards there. Another Hex has gone, as well as the Alakir. Not absolutely necessary to win here for Duncan, but they are things that you'll be a little bit sad about seeing go. And it looks like Leeroy's now going to just pump down, and this is really just putting pressure back on the board. He knows he's going to spawn 2 Void Lords again. They've lost a Hex, so he knows there's no chance of them getting Hex now. And Leeroy is pretty happy with this situation, if in all honesty.
Of course, Duncan, no AoEs, nothing. You can put the Giant down, but it's going to be very difficult. You can maybe win Fury afterwards, but again, it's going to be quite tough from those two Void Lords there. Just going to be a complete, not just a pain, but a thorn for Duncan at the moment, you could say. And I'm trying to figure out exactly what else he could do to try and capitalize on this.
He's just trying to generate as big a board as possible. If he plays the Fire Elemental, he can play the Sea Giant for 0. And actually, that becomes a pretty threatening board. He doesn't have to worry too much about the weapon anymore, the Skullaminari, because obviously you've seen both Void Lords, you've seen one Doomguard. The only benefit that Skullaminari is going to have now is pulling a single Doomguard if Leeroy's running it, which you assume he is with the Doomguards.
I must decide.
But it looks like Duncan's just more invested in building the biggest board possible.
But of course, you can put the Sea Giant down straight afterwards because he's got 10 minions on the board. Absolutely.
And he's generated quite a decent number of spells here. Wind Fury can be useful. Farsight will draw something good. Obviously, the double Feral Spirits are always nice too.
Yeah, he's got Wind Fury. With Duncan, he does have the Wind Fury. So if he does actually place it on the Sea Giant, he can take out a couple more minions on the board each turn. But it's going to be a tough one now because Leeroy, he does, of course, have the Hellfires, the Defiles, but there's absolutely no use for that so far.
Death and Decay is a pretty good one. That's going to allow him to clean up the majority of this board without having to invest Hellfires. And now you just trade off your little dudes. Are you happy to just get rid of the little dudes? They trade up nicely here. But, I mean, Leeroy isn't generating too much pressure at the moment. There is still 5 damage on board, which Duncan will have to think about. I think we're going to go for a Shroom Brewer, and he's going to hold the cube for potentially a big moment like using it on the Doomguard, for instance.
That's right. He's got one Doomguard left, if I remember rightly. And as you can see now with Duncan, he's trying to find something, just an answer to these Void Walkers and Void Lords. But it seems like we'll put a couple of Fell Splits down just to at least, you could say, take the pressure off him a little bit. Of course, the Ooze doesn't much to you, so you can put that down anyway. It seems like now he will try and get as much damage total as possible against Leeroy.
He just wants to try and protect his. He wants to try and protect his face as much as possible. So the Cryostasis there is just to prevent more damage going through to face at this point in time, I think. Although it is a decent trade for Leeroy, he can just use the Hero Power, trade the Void Loan, or even actually just use a Hellfire, and that might just be lethal. No, I don't think it'll be lethal just yet, will it? It's very close. Oh, he's got 2 Hellfires. Of course, it's 2 lethal. It's lethal with the extra Hellfire there, so that's going to be another Hellfire, and that's going to be lethal.
That's literally what he was saving it for, and it seemed like with Duncan, there wasn't really too many openings. Even then, if Leeroy was in some kind of trouble in any way, he had that cube to put on the Void Lord, so it was in quite a tough spot.
I mean, he had a pretty nutty draw, if I'm honest. If you're a cube block and you get... I mean, look...
I was going to say something.
And obviously, it's nerfed Possessed Lackey, but if you have turn 7 Possessed Lackey and Dark Pact twice in a row, you're always going to get value out of that. He had the Mountain Giant to exert pressure. Duncan had the option of hexing that very early on. It traded very nicely into several minions. I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking about the only play that I don't thoroughly understand. It might be because I'm a pleb. Is the Coin Argent Commander play? I guess it was because he thought that it could trade twice, maybe into the Mountain Giant in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
Maybe he wasn't expecting Prince Taladran. Maybe he was just expecting if he went face with it, it might be able to trade twice into the Mountain Giant. And obviously, by pressuring Leeroy's life total, it makes you more willing to trade. But I couldn't. That's the only play that I didn't quite fully understand, and I'm very happy to admit that I had no idea what that play was about. I think my rank 20 version would have just hexed the Mountain Giant. But obviously, like we said, you've got to think about hexes for cubes. You've got to think about hexes for the demons when you've got Blood Reaver Gul'dan on board. But it is still an 8/8 at the end of the day, and still can be threatening.
He just wanted to save that hex for the late game, which is completely understandable. With those Void Lords, and of course, if a cube on top of that, you know, you're not going to have the greatest time in the world. It's going to be quite tough for him. And I think one of the other things I mentioned as well was I was surprised he used a Doomsayer quite early on when he actually used the Defile on top of that. I think that was around turn 3, turn 4. And he kind of like weighted it quite a lot. But it didn't really matter in the end because, of course, he had a really good curse, especially with those Void Lords.
So, according to replay, that is a 51.2% favoured matchup. So, like, almost even for the Cube Warlock there. So Leeroy just came out on the edge of the replay stats. It's going to be another tick in the win box for that. But there you go, we have it. We're going to be going into our next game very shortly, where we will have Leeroy with his... he's played his Rogue, he's played his Warlock, so he's just got his own Shaman to play. And it does look like this is going to be Shudderwock Shaman, I believe, with the Glacial Shard, the Saronite Chain Gang. Lightning Storm, Mana Tide is definitely not even Shaman, that's for sure.
That's right. I'd be interested to see how this goes in the matchup, because it was Shadowwalk, normally used mostly against control decks, but nowadays in the meta, you've seen that with some of the card changes, it actually is quite viable now.
It's a really bad matchup against even Shaman.
And I think you said, is this not even Shaman? Oh, you're talking about Duncan.
Yeah, Duncan. Yeah. So it's Shudderwock for Leroy, and on Duncan's run back with his even Shaman. It's a bad matchup for the Shudderwock Shaman. It's 40% favoured for Shudderwock, so the win rate is very low against even Shaman. And I guess that's because even Shaman can continue to put pressure on board, even with just totems. And there is limited board clear, limited early game clearing stats for Leroy. Once you've used both Lightning Storms and both Volcanoes, you're kind of done for. And so it's really the crucial part of this matchup is knowing when to use your board clears at the right moments. And obviously, you've still got to deal with the continuing pressure that Duncan's going to put on every single turn.
Yeah, because I've played even Shaman quite a lot, but I haven't played against many Shadowwalks. But when I have done, they've tried to be as cost-effective as possible with their Lightning Storms and anything else, of course. And I'd be interested to see when he will have it. Of course, he's got two of them anyway. He's got a Mana Tide Totem to at least get more card draw. So it's gonna be quite difficult, but I wouldn't say he's completely out of it.
I think this is a coin Mana Tide Totem. You know that it's difficult now that, unless he's got another eel, this should be a fairly safe totem. It should get at least 2 cards for you. Definitely have the follow-up of something like Farsight and Lightning Storm afterwards. And he has got Shudderwock in hand, so that is an important draw eventually down the line.
Of course, we've spoken before, it was quite tough, but I've seen a lot of viables with his Shadowwalk deck, but I'm not too sure with this one if it will take out even Shaman. Of course, we know it's one of the top decks in the meta at the moment in terms of the matchups. It does struggle against control quite a lot, but against aggro it doesn't do too bad. But against Shadowwalk, it depends what viable is.
Yeah, Shadowwalk is generally like a control killer. Like, it will just beat a lot of other control decks. Leroy's got a decision to make here. Does he Farsight and just accept that his Mana Tide has got 2 cards for him for 3 mana? It was 3 mana, draw 2 cards. It's not a bad deal at the end of the day. Or with 2 Lightning Storms in hand, knowing that he has the backup of these, does he run the dice, hope that he hits the 3s in the right target, and potentially come out? Because the problem with Lightning Storms, you're running 2 50-50s, which could be devastating or could be amazing, and he's going to run it. He's going to run it. Here we go. Fingers crossed. You can see in his picture there. Oh, and he rolled the 25% worst scenario for him, and he knows that he's very sad about the outcome. But that is the dice that you roll when you run with Lightning Storm.
Yeah, this could be Duncan's chance as you come back. Of course, as you know, Leroy is up 2-0, so Duncan needs to try and make something of this. I would maybe say a little bit too early. Maybe give it another turn or two to see if you can get Spell Totem with that Lightning Storm. But I think he felt like it was probably better to do it now rather than later in case it gets him into even more trouble.
And herein comes the issue with the limited board clear that you have versus something like an even Shaman, which floods really nicely, is that he's now going to have to invest 2 Lightning Storms in essentially what was 1 board state. And you have to then again roll 2 50-50 dices on the Saronite Chain Gang, and they'll probably still remain unless you get that totem, which is another 25% chance. There is a lot of chance involved when it comes to the board clears that the Shudderwock Shaman runs. He really ideally wants to pick up a Volcano ASAP. His life total's not being threatened a huge amount right now, but over the next couple of turns, things like Fire Elemental, Argent Commander, they will be in the back of his mind.
But at least now with Leroy, with another Mana Tide, he can get more card draw and maybe try and figure out his options depending on what the next card draw will be. But he doesn't want to use another Lightning Storm again so early in this matchup because it will, not gonna lie, it will haunt him when it comes out throughout this game. But it seems like he will use his Farsight to see exactly what he's going to get. And as you can see, he does get an Acolyte, so not too bad, but the problem is the fact that that ooze will just take him out straight away if he puts it down.
And again, this is... Leroy's probably just going to have to accept the fact that he's going to have to eat this damage. He's very happy to keep hold of his Acolyte as well, because he knows that, again, that'll get eaten, like you said, by the ooze. Life total just doesn't feel like a super threatening board, but you add all the damage up, and he's threatening lethal. You know, like almost threatening lethal in 1 turn's time. And this has to be a board clear for Leroy. If Leroy does not clear this board, Argent Commander comes down, and I think that's donezo.
Yeah, literally, he's got lethal next turn.
You don't even need Argent Commander, just a lethal on board. So this has to be a board clear from Leroy.
Yeah, I think it's got to that point now, he probably will have to use that Lightning Storm. He may bring up a totem as well, but he has got Volcano on top of that, so at least you know he's got guaranteed board clear.
Actually, my math is terrible today. It's not lethal on board. What I'm talking about is lethal with Archer Commander. My math is awful today, lethal. I don't know what's going on. I don't know how I added 2 and 2 together. I got 7.
I thought I noticed that. I literally looked at the minions and I was like, no, maybe he's. I was like, maybe he's seen something.
Look, I've had a long week. I drove a long time to get here. I can't believe I got an A in maths at A level. I have no idea what I'm doing in my life.
I did a maths degree and I'm still bad at maths, if that helps.
I did medicine and I'm bad at maths. Imagine me being a doctor and I can't add things.
So I think a good excuse would be at the start of the day, so it's just one of those things. But anyways, he's used the Lightning Storm, so he's managed to take most of the minions out, apart from one of the cold chains anyway, but of course, he's saved up Volcano in case something does happen.
Yeah, and Grumble is now here as well, so he's got the Grumble combo for when he starts to play Shudderwock 2. And you can see here now plenty of options for Duncan for how he wants to deal with this. I think the obvious choice is just using one of your fire elementals onto either, I would imagine, the Acolyte, or I mean both. And actually, to be fair, no, probably the Mana Tide because it's the easiest one. Oh no.
I would definitely use it just on the Acolyte because of the fact that, of course, with the Mana Tide you do get another minion, but of course, with the cold chain as well, at least that way you don't get 2 cards from that Acolyte.
Also, you keep alive your Saronite. Sorry, that's something I completely went over my head. It keeps alive his Saronite because obviously that's a 2/1, and that puts more pressure on Leroy's life total. And now every turn, Leroy now has to think, how am I protecting my life total here?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be difficult, but we'll use Nerve Shock anyway to take him out. 3 to 5 elemental, of course, to save him any more damage, and this is probably the best time for him to use the Acolyte. At least now he's only got a minion on board, which is 1/1, and he can try and make that Acolyte as cost-effective as possible.
So you can also think about using Grumble next turn, and then Grumble will give the option to use another Glacial Shard. So that'll allow you to freeze for 2 turns in a row, but this is all just stalling tactics. I think the best option Leroy probably has, or at least he thinks he has, is going to be using Grumble and then followed by Shudderwock if he can survive those 2 turns. You now also have Life Drinker, so you can start to get Life Drinker out as well. But this is going to get a really beefy board. I mean, if another Fire Elemental comes down here and deals with the Acolyte again, Leroy's not going to be super happy.
No, he's not going to have the best of times. And of course, with Leroy, at least he's got a Life Drinker now. I think this is his first one. So that will prepare him for that Shudderwock later on. Does have Hex, so again, more like you said before, more stalling tactics. That's all it is with his Shudderwock. It's the fact that when you're playing against any kind of mid-range or face or anything like that, literally just got to stall them for as long as possible.
He's got Healing Rain. That's a really good pickup because he can use Volcano and Healing Rain this turn. That will clear the board and will put him back up to a life total and force Duncan to start regenerating that board's presence because these are 2 big beefy boys on the board of the Fire Elementals. You can't ignore them. You have to deal with them. You have a Hex, which could work. You have a Life Drinker, which put your life total back up a little bit.
I think he's trying to decide whether he should Hex and Volcano. Oh, so no, is he? No, he's not turn 9 yet. Okay. So with Volcano, of course, it does 15, but it depends on the situation. If it does hit the face more than any of the others.
Oh no, you won't hit the face of Volcano. It will only hit them. It'll only hit the minions. So he knows on board that there is exactly 15. So this is a board that will get completely cleared, but you will lose your own Mana Tide. I think he's just assessing options as to whether he wants, because I think you need to play Grumble before you play Shudderwock. So you can't play Shudderwock next turn anyway, so it doesn't feel like it's a bad turn to Volcano. And then you can follow up with Healing Rain, which will just only be on your face, basically. Yeah.
And he's still got 1 Volcano left anyways. Even though he hasn't drawn it yet, at least he knows he's got some kind of AoE to kind of hold him back. But it seems like it will be hexing one of those elementals, which is still a good play considering the deck Duncan has. But of course, he's still got that Sea Giant, so he may regret it a little bit.
Yeah, he does have to be a little bit careful about that. And now Duncan needs to assess how much damage he's got. He's got an Argent Commander with a Direwolf Alpha, which will give him 12 total there. And then he's got the Spark Eel, which I think he doesn't have enough mana for. So most damage he can pump out this turn is 12, but that will put a lot of pressure onto Leroy. And there is the Hex in the way of actually trading that Life Drinker in regardless. So this board state could come back to punish Leroy because you can't take out your own Mana Tide, so that's extra health, HP on board for the Volcano.
This is the problem as well. With that Sea Giant, wouldn't be too much of a bad play, at least put some kind of threat on the board to use more of Leroy's AoEs. But it's like I said, he hasn't got enough damage yet, and it depends exactly what happens. But maybe if he delays it just 1 or maybe 2 more turns, he can take him out. But of course, Leroy does have that heal to keep him going by another 12 HP.
Looks like it's going to be a Merc Spark with the Direwolf that trades into the Life Drink here. Again, makes the board more difficult to deal with. Although, with the Sea Giant coming down, that makes Volcano really bad. And now Leeroy might be thinking back and saying, was that a better Volcano turn? If I had known that he had Sea Giant, was that a better Volcano turn?
This is the problem he's going to have now. Of course, like you said, Volcano does 15 damage. He's got 21 on the board. And it's going to be a really risky if he actually wants to try and use it, because it might be a little bit too late, unless he uses the Colgan or something else to maybe delay him a little bit more. But again, I don't think it's going to happen.
So risky. I mean, Healing Rain will only keep you alive for so long. This is pretty dire for Leeroy. I feel like your options are either just Saronite Healing Rain and then just hope that you survive long enough. But I mean, that is very difficult with the amount of damage that you're facing down on board. And then the Volcano, because there is so much HP on board, including your own Mana Tide, which is basically stopping you from doing what you want in terms of hitting the right targets. This Volcano is going to be pure RNG based. If it takes out the Fire Elemental, you're blessed, basically. That's kind of what I think you're looking at for Leeroy. He had a prime opportunity for Volcano beforehand, but didn't.
Yeah, because as you can see, he's got 21 damage on board, plus the Argent Command, that's 25.
That's good, actually. He's got 3. I didn't see this player. I wasn't quite looking over, and it's going to get a lot of HP back for him. 3 taunts on board to deal with 2. Is there a way that Duncan gets through this? I don't think there is this turn.
But let's have a look at this as well. Leeroy's got another Volcano, so
yeah.
I would say that's maybe another lifeline for him to at least keep him going, keep him staying in this game until the further turns. But yeah, what a card to get, especially in this, to this point.
He just wants to play Grumble, and then he can play Shudderwalk. With all the battle cries that have happened, he's actually going to start having a beefy Shudderwalk. So if Leeroy can survive a turn and prevent too much face damage, especially with this Ardent Commander looming in Duncan's hand, because Leeroy will be looking at Duncan's hand and said he's held 3 of those cards, and 2 of them have been for pretty much the entire game. So I've got some idea that they are situational cards. He'll have to read whether that is going to be Argent Commander or read whether it's going to be Hex. I assume he thinks it's going to be Hex, at least to a certain degree. And Duncan really just wants to get through the 15 damage this turn. And that's going to be the case with the Direwolf trade here.
I don't think that's a really good play. He knows that he's limited in terms of time. He knows he hasn't got much left until that Shadowwalk could come up. But it's going to take Leeroy at least a couple of turns to get it out. So I think he wants to try and end things as soon as possible before he does get that Shadowwalk out. But of course, he's got a few other cards he needs to play before that.
This has to be a double Volcano turn. And I don't see any other way for Leeroy to survive. I feel like this is pure double Volcano turn.
Oh, this is very difficult as well, because this will be his last AoEs, but I don't think it'll be too bad overall. He will be overloaded by 4. But look at Duncan at the moment. He hasn't got any minions to play.
Exactly, but then Leeroy then has to know that his next turn has some way of surviving if Duncan just puts pressure on board. Like if Duncan shoves down Armani Berserker, which you can see in his hand, or just any kind of pressure, even one more Argent Commander off the top is going to win this for Duncan. So Leeroy is under immense pressure here. And I don't think there are many good ways for him to get out of it. Double Volcanoes is, I think, the only way that he survives.
From my math, it looks like as well. I don't think there's anything more he can do. He's going to feel, at the end of this, it's a little bit of a waste, but it's the only way he can stay in this matchup, especially if he wants to get those other cards out, and then, of course, the Shadowwalk afterwards.
That is a massive draw for Duncan, and he's going to play the Armani as well. And with such limited mana, even if a Hex comes off the top here for Leeroy.
Yeah, I think Duncan had a saving grace at that Lich King then, but now he's got a Hex.
Yeah, but he played around it because obviously he played the Armani as well. I think Leeroy is thinking, is there anything that keeps me alive here? And I'm thinking in my head, not much. And the only thing I think that works is rolling a Taunt Totem and then using the Hex, which is not the Taunt Totem, and I think that means it's the end of the game.
Yeah, even if he hexed that Lich King, of course he's got anti-magic shell as well on top of that. Just to make things, you know, a bit of salt into the room afterwards. But like, you know, it's just one of those things. But well played by Duncan. We knew it was going to be a hard matchup for Leeroy, especially when you're against an even Shaman as that Shadowwalk deck, because like I said before, with Shadowwalk it's mainly a control killer in that respect. So no, well played by him to at least keep him at bay.
Yeah, no, I think There were some turns maybe that could have given him the edge. I think we were talking about that one Volcano turn where there was the perfect opportunity to land a Volcano and clear 2 Fire Elementals. That single Fire Elemental, I think, pumped through a total of 13 damage at the end of the day, which I think if Leeroy reflects on, says, well, obviously in the situation, he probably made the right play, but if he knew what was in the hand and what was potentially coming afterwards, the Volcano might have been the better play there. I think that's the only thing maybe I would have potentially changed, but it's really difficult for me to say that because he's obviously in that situation and having to think about it in the sort of the fly moment. But it was a very bad matchup for the Shadowwalk Shaman. And actually, if we look now at what Duncan's brought, Zoo, probably another bad matchup for the Shadowwalk Shaman, and we'll have to know what Rogue Duncan brings. But I think all of these are tough matchups for the Shadowwalk Shaman. Yeah,
it's going to be extremely tough for him. We spoke about before numerous times, especially with that Shadowwalk deck. Anything like aggro mid-range is a massive pain, not going to lie. I've been through it before. I played a lot of even Shaman, and you know, I always feel like it's a very easy matchup every time I come up against one.
And Duncan has got what we like to call colloquially as the nuts. He's got a big 1-drop into Prince Keleseth, into a 3-drop, or a coin 4-drop into another 4-drop.
Yeah, it's not really a bad start, to be fair. He's having the time of his life.
He's got straight up the nuts here, and I think Leeroy would be very hard-pressed, just given Duncan's opening hand, to actually find a win.
I'm more interested to see his reaction, but yeah, he's not shown much, but he kind of knows deep down that it's going to be very hard work for him to come back from. But, you know, it's still early days. We'll just have to see exactly what he can do. But, of course, we mentioned it before, with Shadowwalk, it's extremely difficult in terms of actually trying to keep him at bay, especially with a deck like this as well. And now we use Keleseth on top of that. It's no going back.
So Duncan has got plenty of options here. Don't need to waste the coin if you don't want to, but there aren't many situations, I think, in Zoo Warlock where you're coining out like a really stringent card. So he has the option to coin out a 4-drop here, but really not much need. There isn't much threat on the board, and I think Duncan very happy to do this. Leeroy can now just Sour Knight, though, to protect this Mana Knight Totem a bit more, which is exactly what he's going to do here, and he's going to get a couple more draws out of that. The more value you get out of the Mana Tide in these matchups, the better.
That's right, with the Mana Tide and, of course, the Acolyte, which he hasn't even got yet. He needs to get as much card draw as possible. And even with the Lightning Storm he has, so at least he's got 1 AoE, but it depends by chance if it does do 2 or 3 damage to all the minions. And you can get that Spell Totem, maybe after to see if it has any effect. But, of course, he does have Volcano again.
Yeah, Volcano, but only one of them so far. And again, it's assessing the right situation. He's got a Lightning Storm. This is not the best board for Lightning Storm. You'd have to roll a 50% on every single one of the minions. Obviously, you could trade one of your Sour Knights in to guarantee a kill there, but not ideal scenario.
Yeah, I think he just doesn't want to use that Volcano because he wants to keep the Mana Tide up, which I understand from his perspective.
Also, it's just a bit of a waste right now. You're not really threatened a huge amount. You know, I think this is probably a decent Farsight turn. Just see what you draw. And then you can totem afterwards, and then you're still contesting the board to a degree.
He can, of course, get a totem out, and if it is a spell, then he could use Lightning Storm.
Yeah, and it's not, so it's this just feels like a Farsight now. Oh, he's going to use it anyway.
Right, let's see if he had better chances compared to last game.
That's actually not bad.
No, he took out most of them, which is good. It was better than I expected, because I remember the last game, it was absolutely horrendous. I think, was it what you said, 25% chance it could have actually happened to him in the end? So yeah, he's had a bit more luck this time around.
So the Lightning Storm there did really do good work for Leeroy. He doesn't trade into the Tar Creeper, knowing obviously that the Tar Creeper doesn't have the same attack on Duncan's turn, so he's not going to get a good trade out of the Sour Knight. That's going to keep it up and alive for one more turn, and that means Leeroy's protecting that Mana Tide even more, and is drawing more and more as well, with another Sour Knight that he can throw down this turn that delays the game even more. And it's exactly what Leeroy wants. He just wants to delay.
And even though Duncan's got that Leeroy, he's got Soulfire as well, so he hasn't really got many options to play with. He may have to tap afterwards, considering his circumstances.
You can see Duncan's eyes there. They rolled back in his socket and said, "Oh, for God's sake."
No, another one.
No. This is, I mean, great hand for burst to the face, kind of, but disaster hand for what Duncan wants to do right now.
Yeah, maybe if it was closer to lethal, that would have been a fantastic way to finish things off, but not so early in the game.
Coining out the Life Drinker, that combo between Life Drinker and Light Warden, is going to make a slightly threatening 1-drop, a 4-3. I would happily take that most days of the week.
But in Duncan's position right now, he can tap as much as he likes because, of course, with ShadowWalk. He doesn't have many minions to be quite aggressive with, especially in the circumstances he's in now.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say he's in the worst spot. As long as he taps and gets some decent card draws, he should be okay.
Leeroy has options here. Looks like he's going to go for the Sandvine and draw the Elemental out, which is going to be to giving the double battle cries. And we'll have to see what he chooses to do with that. Not many good double battle cries that he can use off the bat. I mean, Glacial Shard will just freeze the same target twice, so it's not ideal. However, Glacial Shard will help delay the board really nicely for Leeroy, and he's just going to use the two of them as it is.
Yeah, that was a good play. He's fending him off as much as he can so far.
The ultimate Mana Tide. Just value after value after value.
Yeah, that's literally has been there since turn 3, isn't it?
Yeah. Tap and Fungal Mancer seems like a solid play for Duncan here. Got 2 minions that you can keep alive, for the most part, depending on what you want to trade into.
Yeah, it seems like he's in a better spot now. I think that tap was worth it. He knows he has to get something going, at least be as aggressive as possible, not just to get full board control, because, as you know, with Leeroy, he has to play that side of things in terms of at least keeping Duncan away from the situation.
I like the face hit, by the way, coming out from Leeroy. Oh, that's a really good Hagatha. Clears up the entire board there. He's got the value that he needed out of his Mana Tide, and that's the entire board for Duncan gone down the loo. And I think Leeroy realizes that the hand is pretty burst heavy coming from Duncan, considering there are 3 cards that he hasn't touched, and all of the cards that he's been playing has been on the other side of his hand. And so Leeroy will be very aware that his life total is a resource that he needs to protect from this point.
Yeah, that was extremely cost-effective. There was not a better time I can think of using a Hagatha compared to anything else. But he does get a few more minions on the board. We'll have that Voidwalker to cover Duncan afterwards. But again, as you can see, Leeroy still has a Volcano, still has a Hex, so he's got a few things to at least keep him at bay. And of course, he has that heal to get him back up.
The Healing Rain is there now, Lethal. But plenty of options. This is where it starts to get complicated for the ShadowWalk Shaman, because you have got so many options. It's about choosing the absolute right one for the circumstances. You are afraid of 8 power on board, especially given that you think that there is burst there. So it is an option for you to use the Volcano, and I don't think anybody would be punishing Leeroy for using the Volcano in this scenario, just given the read that he hopefully has on Duncan's hand. And I think that's what he's going to do here, trade in and use the Volcano.
He's probably noticed that there's been a few cards he's not used for a while.
Wait a second. I misspoke. He's actually just going to straight up start using ShadowWalk because he has got 2 potential Glacial Shards. Oh, they freeze the same target, though.
Wasn't a bad time to play that at all. And, of course, now it's going to be very tough for Duncan, and he knows it as well.
Yeah.
Considering his circumstances, he hasn't got enough damage to even do anything. So he's got 14 damage plus the 4 on the board, 18. But if he uses the Fungal Mancer, it's going to be 22.
It's Keleseth Leeroy, so I think it's actually 15, is it?
6, 10, 14, 18, 20, 22?
It's Keleseth Leeroy, right? So it's 7 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4. So it's 19 damage in total, I think.
Yeah,
that he can play, because you have to make sure, and you would have to hope.
Yeah, you're right.
You'd have to hope that your Soulfire does not. You've got a 2 in 3 chance, but it's obviously no point using it right now because.
Do you know what I was thinking actually? I was thinking it was turn 10, because of course, if he had Leeroy and the Fungal Mancer as well on top of that, then he definitely would have had lethal. But sadly, just 1 mana crystal out of it to have that lethal.
That's Shudderwalk down the drain now for Leeroy, so he doesn't have that Shudderwalk win condition anymore. So it's primarily going to have to come through Hagatha, I think, or just somehow exerting pressure with Grumble. He doesn't really have another strict win condition because the Shudderwalk's now been dealt with. That was the risk of playing Shudderwalk. That was the risk of not getting the double freeze on the right targets. And now Leeroy has to think about a win condition that sort of either just runs Duncan out of resources or plays with something like Grumble. And you can see Grumble here is 7-7 on board. This is where I think Leeroy is looking for a win.
I do feel sorry for Duncan. 1 turn away from having that lethal, and of course, he could have used that Fungal Mancer with his Leeroy and could have finished things off. But I think he knows it as well. He knew deep down, but he's just barely missed out. But he will take out his own Leeroy anyway, but at least he's getting a few more minions back on board. So this is where it could be the opposite effect. Leeroy could have a few issues, but he still has that heal.
Yeah, absolutely. He's also got a lot of hexes. He's got a lot of stool potential here. And I think a lot of this game now is going to come down to the RNG of Hagatha just getting him good cards. That is a good card. Lava Burst is a good card. This is good spell RNG for Leeroy. It could spell a potential win condition by maintaining his board state. So I would be even tempted to just use something like Crushing Hand or Hex on the Harpy, the Ghoul, trade in my 3-1 into the, my 3-3 into the 1-3, maintain my board state, and look for a Lava Burst and Bloodlust win condition here for Leeroy.
Yeah, Leeroy still has plenty of options, which is great. You said it before, where he's got more than enough spells to not just keep him in the game, but have that win condition as well. And Duncan's seriously running out of options. These next 2 card draws he's going to have, especially after Life Tap, is going to change things massively. He may even have to put on the Spell Break on board.
What a big draw for Leeroy.
Oh no.
Massive draw for Leeroy. And now he's got a board that next turn with Lava Burst and Bloodlust, if he can play it. I don't know what the overload for Crushing Hand is. I think it's 3, isn't it?
From the top of my hand, I think it might be about 3. It might be right. I'm going to have to double check on this when you check.
But even so, like, Bloodlust is a massive, massive deal for him. And I think actually Bloodlust just wins in the game. Like, straight up wins in the game here. I think Leeroy just got a Hagatha win after wasting a Shadow Walk. Not wasting, I mean, it kept him in the game, but that's massive for him. Duncan can't take it. He gets the concede, and Leeroy gets a win in a 40% matchup, another one for the Shadow Walk Shaman. So massive win for him.
That's a good thing about Hagatha as well. It's the fact that if you do play the Shadow